everybody. We are back at Daniel's Vineyard in McCordsville, Indiana, and this time we are going to show you behind the scenes. We are with Blake, the winemaker here at Daniel's. Blake, you're going to share with us a little bit about the process of how we get the grapes to the bottle.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so we are super lucky here in McCordsville, Indiana, that we have a vineyard right on site. It's just outside. You can take a look at it as you're driving up to the winery. And so we're super lucky. We have 20 acres of our own grapes that we grow here that we get to make very local wine out of, but we also source fruit from the West Coast, and that's how we can make things you may be more familiar with, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, things like that. So grapes only come in one time per season, and that is in the fall. So they start growing in the spring, take all summer to ripen, and then in the fall is whenever we measure the sugar level, and that's when we harvest. And based on those levels, that's how we know how much alcohol we're going to have in the wine. And then all the grapes come in here, even the stuff that we get from the West Coast. It's not juice, it's not any sort of concentrate or anything. Yeah. We're actually getting clusters of grapes shipped in from the West Coast. So we have growers in Washington State as well as California, so we can make those classic varieties like I talked about earlier. The grapes all get processed here. They go through our crusher and destemmer, and then they get aged in these tanks for fermentation. Red wine and white wine take a little bit of different time. White wine you can usually have from grape to bottle in just a couple of months, but red wine can take 2 to 3 years depending on the style that you're trying to make, and if you're trying to barrel age it or do anything special to it. So winemaking is not a quick process like beer where you can source the ingredients and make it in a couple days. It is a long process. You only technically make the wine one time a year. The rest of the year you're kind of just aging it and guiding it. Yes, but aging it, drinking as well. You got to do the quality check from time to time, which we'll get to do. We'll taste them out of the barrel here in just a moment.
And so tell us the difference between how you go about making white wine versus red wine, because I think a lot of people assume that you have white grapes and you have red grapes, and surely that's how it's done.
So white wine, you're completely removing all of the skins, all of the stems, and then you're just fermenting that by itself to get a nice crisp white wine. For red wine, you're actually fermenting it on the skins, and the skins give it all of the color, all of the tannin, all of the structure, all of that kind of bite and the bigness that you feel in your mouth. That's all from the skins that you're fermenting it on. And then after the fermentation is over, then you run it through the press, and then you get just your wine, just the juice, which is at that point wine, because all of the sugar has been converted with yeast into alcohol, which is what we're going for.
So what about the difference then between a sweet variety versus a dry variety? What does the processing look like to achieve that?
Sure, so it depends on the style of wine you're trying to make. A lot of people with sweet wine, they will actually just have a dry wine and then add sugar to it, and that gives you a sweet wine.
Like you would do that in one of these
tanks, process? You could do that, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You would normally do that right before you get ready to bottle it to make sure that if there's any ambient yeast, it's not going to start fermenting again, because yeast loves sugar. But the way that we typically like to do it here is actually reserve the sweetness that's already in the grapes. Grapes come in, they're very sweet already. Some of that sweetness, sugar, gets converted into alcohol. And what we actually do here is stop fermentation, so that some of that sweetness gets converted into alcohol, and then the rest remains just as the natural sweetness from that grape. So things like our Moscato and some of our canned wines that are sweet are really very naturally sweet, because they're not added sugar. It is just the natural sweetness of the fruit that comes in. So it's just the way that we handle it, and we always like to not mess with wine, not mess with grapes if we don't have to.
I mess with a good thing.
Keep them as natural as possible and really let them shine for themselves.
So first you bring in the grapes, we crush them, ferment them, and as much as I'd love to just drink it right out of the vat, we can't. So tell us a little bit about what happens when the wine is ready.
Sure, so after the wine has been properly aged and then potentially filtered or settled so that there's no sediment in the bottle, then we're going to go into the bottling line. So we have our own bottling line here, and empty bottles go in down here. They come through to this first station where they actually get flipped upside down and rinsed out to make sure the bottle is nice and clean. They come out of there rinsed, and they go to this station here where they actually get a dose of nitrogen gas, and that gets all the oxygen out of it. Oxygen is the enemy of wine. Then it goes into this right here, which is our filler. So the bottles start empty, go all the way around, and then come out full. We have a fully packaged wine. We're just looking to dress it up a little bit. So here's where the capsule will go on, so that kind of tin or kind of sleeve that you see over the top of corks, that will go on right there. It will get heat shrunk onto the bottle to make sure it's nice and tight and there's no wrinkles. And then down here is actually where it gets the label applied front and back at the same time. And then it comes out down here as a finished product. So some of our bolder red wines and then also our Chardonnay are two of our wines that do get barrel aged. So barrels just add another layer of flavor to them. So you want them to, you have all this bright fruit flavor that comes from really young wine, and you want that to kind of mellow out and then also pick up some underlying flavors. Barrels, we use American oak, so flavors that you're going to get imparted from that are typically going to be in the kind of vanilla, butterscotch, caramel kind of flavor profile. They tend to be, they're sweet flavors, but it doesn't add sweetness to the wine. It just kind of adds that really oaky, kind of beautiful sweetness that you want to kind of balance out the wine.
Rounded.
Yeah. And barrels are round for a reason. It does kind of help smooth out all the rough edges.
Yeah.
Wine that is really young can be really bitter, especially if it's really dry. So aging it in barrels actually does kind of mellow it out a little bit. I said the oxygen is the enemy of wine, but tiny amounts of oxygen in the bottling process can actually help your wine age longer in the bottle because it's already been exposed to a tiny amount of oxygen. So, barrels are not like tanks. There's a tiny bits of oxygen that can get in there. So it's
porous material.
Exactly. So it's getting just a little bit of oxygen, just enough to kind of smooth it out, and then also set it up so where it could really be an age-worthy wine.
So like a cab, for example, does well in the bottle for several years.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to pull a barrel sample. This is actually a barrel that we've held back for a couple of years, back from 2017. So a Cabernet Sauvignon from 2017. I'm going to use my barrel thief here. Grab a sample.
When will this be ready to bottle?
So technically this is ready. We're kind of saving it for a special project that we're going to blend a couple different barrels together, a couple older barrels together.
Okay.
So,
all right, teach me how to do this properly.
Yeah, so the first thing you want to do is kind of look at the wine. Okay. So as you're looking at it, you can kind of notice it's a little lighter in color. It's kind of get a brick red color at the edges. That's from age. So that happens kind of as wine ages. It loses some of that bright pink or really dark color and kind of fades into more of a brick red color. So that can tell you a few things. It can tell you about the age. It can also tell you, if you kind of get a little swirl there, you can see people are always looking at the legs.
Right.
So that will indicate if there's any sugar in the wine or if it's a high alcohol wine.
If it's leggier, is it higher sugar?
The slower the legs fall, the higher the sugar or the higher the alcohol. So sugar and alcohol acts very similar in that way.
Okay.
So once you've done that, you kind of evaluated it, give it a swirl, nose deep in there. So you definitely get, it's been in a barrel for a long time, so you get a lot of barrel notes.
More like woodsy.
Yes, very woodsy. That's why this will be a good blending component. You blend it with something that doesn't have a lot of oak flavor, and they can really balance each other out. So lots of oak on this one because it's been in barrel for a long time.
Yes.
But you also notice some of those sweet notes that I was talking about. You definitely get the vanilla and caramel, I do. So then after you've smelled it, down the hatch, right? So you can notice how smooth it is.
Super smooth.
Yeah, and that's just time.
Okay.
Time in barrel is what does that. So.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers.